How's it going? I love that song. I know it sounds a little hokey. It is a little hokey, but I love that song because it's by this group called Los Tigres del Norte, the Tigers of the North. And the song's called The Golden Cage. It's written in the perspective of a very comical perspective of Mexican immigrants coming up to the U.S. and realizing once they get here that maybe the American dream isn't exactly what they thought it would be. And that's something I think rings true for a lot of Mexican immigrants here in the U.S. today. And the people that I know and work with kind of see it as their anthem. And I've kind of gotten to see it as my anthem too, in a way. In the summer of 2010, I took a summer internship with a nonprofit called Student Action with Farm Workers that advocates for migrant farm workers in the southeastern United States. And I had one basic charge. That was to set up as many English classes with migrant farm workers as possible in the western half of North Carolina. That's baby Yuvia. I actually taught English to her mom all summer. But I have to confess, I didn't know anything about migrant farm workers before I started the internship. I really just took it as a way to practice my Spanish over the summer. But I was really, very soon I was shocked by what I saw. There are about 3 million people in the US today who work as migrant farm workers, and they harvest the vast majority of our food. Yet, the average farm working salary is only $11,000 a year. And moreover, only 10% of farm workers have employer-provided health insurance, despite working what's consistently ranked as one of the most dangerous and deadly jobs in our nation today. Farm workers face daily risks like dehydration, pesticide and chemical exposure, arthritis and joint and muscle damage, and severe malnutrition, despite being the ones that actually harvest all our food. They're the ones that aren't eating. I saw all of this and more while I was in North Carolina. And on top of terrible working conditions, farm workers also usually have terrible living conditions. This is an actual toilet at one of the camps that I worked at. As you can see, that bucket there is because the toilet doesn't flush. The impact that this all had on the people I was teaching English to was really heartbreaking. And I wanted to talk to you about one guy in particular that I knew. His name was Javier. At the time, he was 19, the same age as me. And Javier was from a poor Mexican family. And so when he was in middle school, he dropped out to become a farm worker to support his family. He was bright, and he was funny, and he was also very, very tired at the end of every day after working in the fields. Just try to imagine laboring in the summer heat for at least 12 hours a day, then coming back home to do homework, and not just to do homework, but to learn English. It's really crazy, and Javier actually did it. He was one of the best students I ever had. My last night on the job, I gave my final English class at Javier's camp, and afterwards we kind of stood outside, kicking at the grass, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. I'd brought my boss along, and I had told him beforehand about Javier's passion for learning, and so he asked Javier, "Javier, do you think that you'll ever go back to school?" And what Javier said changed my life forever. "No," he said, "not in this life." After that, I decided to dedicate my life to working for immigrants, both here and abroad. And so when I came back to Charleston, I started HOLA. It stands for Hispanic Outreach and Literacy Advancement. It's a student organization that partners with the Charleston County school system to send CFC students to give English classes to immigrants in our local area. The best part for me was seeing how excited my peers were. People often say that College of Charleston students aren't very involved. We get a bad rap, and that's just not true. We just actually want to work towards something that we're passionate about. We're just sick of the same old lame, boring, cookie-cutter volunteer programs that seem to plague so many college campuses around the nation. Where we want to work for a real program with real initiatives that shows real results. And so that's what I tried to do with HOLA, and it worked. We started off small, working with about 40 immigrant students 2 nights a week. But soon we expanded to over 100 immigrants 4 nights a week. And I had more CFC students lining up to volunteer than I had space or resources for. It was so exciting. But then in the beginning of 2012, that all changed. South Carolina proposed a bill called SB 20. And if you don't know anything about SB 20, basically what it did was it said that it demanded all state and local police units to check any suspicious-looking individuals, whatever that means, documentation. And if that person couldn't provide adequate documentation, again, whatever that means, they could be thrown in jail for an indefinite period of time, and even afterwards may be deported without any kind of trial or hearing or anything else. So obviously this is a problem, and human rights groups around the nation denounced it, saying that it was blatantly racist and especially promoted racism against Latinos. You can argue the ethical implications of it all day, but let me tell you the impact it had locally and on me personally. SB 20 killed hola. Our attendance rates for English classes plummeted, and hola's work was forced to go on indefinite hiatus simply because we had no one to teach anymore. None of the immigrant students felt safe coming to class, and let me emphasize, most of our students were here with the proper documentation. I think part of the reason was because there's so many nightmare stories circulating around at the time. So-and-so's brother-in-law was pulled over for a routine traffic stop and ended up being handcuffed and thrown in jail. Or another person's grandmother was slammed to the concrete and handcuffed in front of her grandchildren. Now, we don't really know which of these stories are true and which of these are false. And that's the scariest part about SB 20, is that it blurs the lines. It blurs the lines between reality and fiction, between preventative measures and racial profiling, and between morality and immorality. And so a lot of people have asked me, where do we go from here? What do we do? And I just don't have a simple answer for that. When outright racism and discrimination is formally recognized by your governing state body, what do? Do you protest? Do you hold rallies? That just doesn't really seem sufficient anymore. And I can tell you that there have been a lot of good people working really hard to make sure SB 20 doesn't become a full reality, and parts of it have been shot down and declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. But in the fear and the hurt and the distrust that the Latino community felt because of that still remain. And in the past, I felt like I had to explain to Americans why we should be more accepting of immigrants. But lately, I felt like I've had to explain to immigrants why they should be more accepting of us. And that's really sad. When the laws that we make hurt others, they also hurt ourselves. Through hola, tons of CFC students were getting involved, were excited to change their community, and were learning about other cultures and expanding their minds. Then SB 20 came along and just swept that all from under our feet. That's the real tragedy of this bill. The cultural exchange I saw taking place was killed. The cultural bonding was replaced with mistrust and fear, and all these opportunities that we worked so hard for were lost. The only way SB 20 will truly disappear and the Latino community's faith can be restored is if we collectively decide that we're going to take a proactive approach to shaping our own society. I don't know where Javier is right now. I wish I did. But I do know that if we make our community as inclusive as possible, bills like SB 20 could never be passed, and all the other Javiers might finally find acceptance in this life instead of the next. Thank you.